The little brain learns, all of this is my fault. Something about me is causing people to treat me this way. Either I am worthless on the inside and they all see it, and I'm a bad kid, so I have to earn approval from people by being perfect and getting everything right and making them happy. Or I have to protect myself from other people by acting upon them and making them do the things that I need to get my needs met.
So welcome to the podcast, Adam Lane Smith, aka Attachment Adam. It's an honor to have you here, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to doing this one with you, so I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, man. And I suppose for people that are joining us, like, I know you're a registered therapist. Obviously, you're mainly an attachment specialist now. How would you describe what you do and the service that you offer to people?
Yeah, so I worked for years as a licensed psychotherapist. Now I specialize in attachment. I'm an attachment specialist. That means I coach people through healing their relationships, especially in dating and marriage. I work with people on repairing those anxieties and insecurities they've had since childhood. It is all about attachment. And attachment is the way that we connect to other people to give and receive love. So learning to connect and give and receive love in all your relationships, that's what I teach.
Fantastic. Obviously, as I was saying beforehand, like, such an important topic for the relationship space at the moment is slightly complicated. I assume you have kind of a lot of business in terms of this area.
It's the dating pool and just relationships and life in general has got more and more complicated over the last 100 years. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't see attachment getting better in our culture, but maybe we can change that. Maybe we can turn that around.
And it's an interesting kind of segue in, because there was something I wanted to ask you about, which is kind of intergenerational attachment problems. I mean, is that the way that this works? It seems to be that you're getting it from parents who got it from their parents, and you have this kind of lineage thing. I wondered, could you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. That is exactly how this game goes. A child is born and instantly begins learning in their world of if people will care for them and nurture them and act with them cooperatively and give them respect and care for their dignity as a human being, or if people are going to neglect them, hurt them, just drop them, not talk to them, not bother to meet their needs, or if people will act upon them more like an object. Are they going to be treated like a person or like an object in their life? And this starts from birth, when the baby cries and tries to get fed. And maybe if a baby goes into a NICU, over here in America, we call it the NICU, where if the baby is really hurt or sick, something is wrong, they get put in the incubator kind of system. It's not an incubator, but they get put in there for 2-3 weeks. And it's a sterile environment where there is not that human warmth, that connection. So they cry, they don't get picked up, they don't get nurtured. You can try to hold them a little bit, but the baby learns nobody's going to care for me. If we get put over here in America, we don't have much leave for parents, so a baby might go into daycare at 4 or 6 weeks old and be with strangers. And the baby learns, mom is leaving me with strangers every day. What is happening? And maybe the stranger is good and helpful, maybe the stranger is not. But then that primary caregiver may change, and the baby learns that primary caregivers can go away, and abuse, neglect, mom and dad are depressed, mom and dad just aren't around, dad is gone, whatever it may be, the little brain learns, all of this is my fault. Something about me is causing people to treat me this way. Either I am worthless on the inside and they all see it, and I'm a bad kid, so I have to earn approval from people by being perfect and getting everything right and making them happy. Or I have to protect myself from other people by acting upon them and making them do the things that I need to get my needs met. And that, it definitely comes down from generational attachment, because if your parents don't know what to do, how to give you that love and nurturing and show you that you are a warm, loving, dignified human being and work cooperatively with you while they're raising you, they might not do the bad things that would definitely harm you, but they may miss the good things that will give you that reassurance. So you may be trapped in generational attachment issues. Maybe it's been 5 generations of bad or difficult parents who trace down to your parents who tried not to do bad, but just didn't know how to do good. And now here you are, anxious, and you don't know why.
Yeah, man. And it's there's kind of a dilemma there as well in terms of like the parental kind of, because if that holds up, the parents are kind of victims of that as well. I feel like in our culture, maybe it's Freudian psychology or something, there's been a big emphasis on like the parents are to blame always. And there's kind of an interesting double two-way street there a little bit. That's like, okay, you know, it's kind of falling down or something. So yeah, I wonder, is that something then that are people dealing specifically with those issues, with the parental issues, or is it just because it's showing up in their relationship? You know, are you looking at it as the past or the present for these problems?
That really, when people come to me, they're adults. Sometimes they're 20, 30, 40. I've even worked with people in their 70s who come to me and say, I want to fix my relationships now. And all we do is we trace back, where did the broken attachment come from? Because it's a foundational belief that gets rooted into somebody's head. You know, water is wet, gravity pulls things down, and I am an unlovable piece of crap that no one will ever care for. So we don't have to go back and repair that. You don't lay on the couch for 6 weeks and crying about your parents. You don't do that. It is just, they need to understand in the first session, usually, where it came from, where they got skewed sideways. And then from there, we say, okay, here is what will change that attachment and start healing that in your relationships now. You need to experience the opposite and comprehend the opposite, and you need to perceive that you are actually loved, and that will change the way your brain functions. And when they start doing that and following those steps, I've got steps laid out. I got an attachment boot camp course on my website, adamlanesmith.com.
Yep.
It shows you all the steps to do this. And when you do that correctly, when you solve those steps, it starts healing them today. It's not so much about healing the past, it's healing your current relationships and experiencing that change for yourself.
Yeah, and how much do you rate the kind of system of attachment? I know like a little bit about Bowlby's, anxious, secure, avoidant. Do you think that that's still relevant, or do you have a different way of doing it?
Yes. Absolutely. So I stick to those mains. There's all kinds of broken down charts you can see from people who say, oh, you know, it was this and this and this kind of avoidant, this kind of. I say there's 4 types. There's secure, and that's good. That's the good love, like I'm cared for, I'm nurtured, I'll be taken care of, I can trust people to act in good faith. And then there's 3 insecure types that break down into avoidant, which is I can't trust anybody else, so I have to stay safe by pulling away from people, but also pushing their buttons to get my own needs met. Not like full-on sociopath, I'm going to control people and hurt them, but I got to stay away from people, and I'm going to tell them what they want to hear, but that's for my sake to kind of stay back and stay safe. There's an anxious style of I am worthless, no one can ever love me, so I have to earn approval from people. And this can grow into codependence of I need to earn approval from people and do nice things for people, so I got to find people who have problems, and I need to be needed so that they can never abandon me. That's the terror of abandonment. And then number 3 is called disorganized, which now is called anxious/avoidant. It's a combo of being so anxious and worried all the time that you start becoming avoidant, where you start taking control of other people because that's the only way you know how to stay safe. You've been hurt so many times in your anxiety that all you can do is control other people to try to protect yourself. Those are the 4 main types of attachment. And people break them down into smaller chunks from there. And maybe that's helpful, maybe it's not. But at its core, it is learning to open up to other people and trust them and trust yourself to work in good faith, and then experiencing those relationships for yourself that your brain is meant to be feeling.
It's so interesting. So much of your advice that I've seen, I know those categories might be useful for people to kind of figure out if they're hopefully not self-diagnosing, but that might kind of give an indication. But a lot of your work, it seems to come down so much to just what you were saying, like, is honest conversation, like asking for your needs and being able to put yourself out there and be vulnerable without having to play these kind of games that are kind of submerged, you know. And it's interesting. I suppose I'm nodding along silently as if I don't have these issues myself and haven't been facing them for such a long time. So I understand that fear of voicing your needs and not kind of, I suppose, not putting yourself out there. And how much is that the step for avoidant, for anxious? You know, is that really what it comes down to for people?
It all comes down to learning to open up and cooperate with other human beings. I call it acting with versus acting upon. That's really the heart and soul of fixing your attachment. So from an anxious perspective, the person who thinks they are worthless, it is learning to open up and connect to other people despite the fear that if they do, other people will see that they are worthless and a fraud and will abandon them and reject them. It's overcoming something to reach the same goal. The avoidant person has to overcome the fear that other people are not to be trusted. So they have to overcome that belief that if they open up, it will be used against them and they will be hurt for it or controlled by it. Because their view is that other people are going to act upon them, not necessarily abandon them, but use it as leverage against them. And that's what they have to overcome, is the fear of being controlled and hurt in that way. But it's the same outcome of learning to cooperate with other people, that other people will act in good faith, and learning those experiences so that you can work with them. That's the heart of attachment. When you have good attachment, you know that other people will act in good faith and that you can talk to them and hear them out without having to jump ahead and shape the narrative.
Yeah. It's so much about trust and kind of being open to relationships with other people, which is, I suppose, difficult nowadays. There seems to be such a commerce of different groups almost. I know, like, from the memes and stuff on Instagram I don't know if you've ever heard of Hoodville and this kind of like manosphere. Like, I do like, I mean, I understand why that's present in a sense, but then again, there's this kind of, you know, going to the opposite pole of one end and the other one goes, is there kind of, do you think there's almost like a feud going on or something? Like, because individuals, I can't see how people can be healthy in the mainstream kind of way things are going. Like, you almost have to pull away from it or something.
We live, and especially here in the Western culture, we live in 100 years of broken attachment that has got worse and worse and worse over the last 100 years. So we stop and say, open up, connect to other people, trust them, believe that they act in good faith, and cooperate with them. Make yourself vulnerable to them, and it will go great, and you will feel better. And that is the opposite messaging we receive from our friends, our family, the media, everybody. Instead, we are all factioning off into tribal groups who don't even trust each other, but at least we are unified against other enemies that we don't like, that we could point at and say, oh, those people. And then we can look at that and say, oh, you know, there's something different about us, so at least we can band together, and you people won't abandon me because I at least have worth in some way to our group. And we are built in to say, here is the worth that I have, and here's why you can't abandon or hurt me. And then we do everything we can to earn approval and make people like us to try to insulate ourselves from that fear. And that is so much of our culture, and it has got so much worse over the last century that we can't really imagine a healthier system. When we look back here in the United States, when I try to explain, like, this is love, this is care, this is what real love is. Real love is two people mutually fulfilling each other's needs on both sides, who are equally focused on making sure both sides get their needs met. Not being a martyr for the other person or being a doormat for them, but also not aggressively taking from the other person to meet your own need. It's mutual fulfillment in good faith. That's what love is. And when I say that, people say, oh, well, that's like 1940s television that people just want. You know, it is. That's as far back as we have to go to be able to picture what healthy must look like. And that is why we are where we are, as political spectrums, as sub-political groups, the manosphere versus the feminists, and everybody mad at each other, and everyone terrified of each other, and everyone's so sure that everyone else is out there to rob them and take from them, and that no one could ever act in good faith. And so we can't cooperate. That's a massive reason why we are where we are.
It's incredible, man. The cynicism around, even as you were saying about love there, like, I was imagining kind of the response to that at times, which is this suspicion almost that it's like somebody's selling something, or you're like, there's this kind of, you know, there's some sort of pitch or some sort of angle. Like, it almost seems like that to talk about trust and love and connection with people is like naive or something. It's so fallen. The internet's just so cynical. It's like, it's really disturbing, I think. But it reminded me, I posted an Iris Murdoch quote during the week, which is that love is the extremely disturbing realization that something other than yourself is real.
And that is so brutally true.
Yeah. just kind of going beyond the egocentrism. I mean, how much is, for attachment issues, is it being wrapped up with this story that you're telling yourself? Because I think I kind of fall into the avoidant camp probably more. But what I started to do was pay attention to the stories. Sorry, go ahead.
It is all a story that we are telling ourselves. It is a story we are telling ourselves based on a fundamental belief about other human beings, which we then project onto everybody we meet now. It is a misunderstanding and a disconnect between a child and their parents that then grows up into a massive projection on every human being you'll ever meet until you challenge that assumption. That's why I go on these podcasts. That's why I do my live streams on my TikTok channel. It's why this is so important to get the word out, because people just struggle to believe it's real, right? When you hear, like, here's Adam Lane Smith coming in talking about love and connection and be open, trust people, and really listen and cooperate. People will act in good faith. It sounds like I'm pitching a cult. It sounds like I am telling you to come down to my compound in Colombia and give me all of your money. And that's what it sounds like when I teach people about love and attachment. And I'm aware of that. Because that is the cynicism, like you said, that so many people have built into their hearts of love is not real, love can't work. And when somebody finally opens up and they come to, 5 of my TikTok live events, I'm at Attachment Bro over there, friendly name. When they come to 5 of my TikTok lives and they're seeing people come in and talking about it, and it's not just me as a talking head on the screen saying, guys, attachment's real and here's what it is. But then they see people in the group, in the chat saying, like, it's amazing, I fixed it. I read this guy's book and it sounded weird at first, but this is amazing and I'm trying it and it's fixing it. And they're seeing other people around them fix it. Then they start to believe. And that's step 0. You must even start to believe that attachment is possible and that it can be changed. And then everything flows from that, because then it opens the door that maybe the stories you tell yourself in your head about why you can never connect to people and never be open, maybe they're not completely true. Maybe there's another alternative.
Yeah, man, that's a very empowering message. It was something I kind of learned from CBT and from studying Stoicism. Like a big part of that is, separating the meaning and the event, the kind of the story that you're projecting onto it, and having that kind of like stepping back and going, well, how much evidence do I have for this? Does everybody hate me, or am I just kind of like, blowing out of proportion what actually happened? And that's really empowering, I think, for people that are kind of stuck in these loops, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, when you realize that it may not be true, then you start maybe thinking about alternatives. And then when you do the same thing you've always done, it starts kind of bothering you. And every time you make those little pieces that you normally wouldn't have questioned, you start thinking. And then maybe you start testing. And then maybe you start experiencing something just a little bit different. And once you have that, your brain is built for it. Our brains are built for healthy attachment. That's why we have so much emotional and psychological and social pain going on, is our brains aren't meant to have broken attachment. They're not meant to live in a system that is this cynical and this detached. We are meant to live very connected in good faith and love with each other. That's what we're built for. And so when we experience it, it floods your brain, and people come back to me the first time they have a good conversation with someone and they choose to open up, and they come back to me just like stunned and say, what is this? Why does it feel like this? How could it be? How could I be this happy? Does this go away? And they just like freak out, because the euphoria of experiencing what your brain is supposed to experience every day is overwhelming to them. The difference is it's like night and day when you experience good attachment. And that's why people can't go back. Once they learn about attachment and they experience it once, they can never go back, because they don't want to live that way anymore.
Man, very true. And do you think people with attachment issues gather together? I mean, is it so? I know I'd heard you speak about it before, kind of, that there's people who with secure attachments tend to hang out with people with secure attachments, people with other problems. I've seen some research on people with mental health problems pairing up with people with mental health problems more than vice versa. I don't know why, but is that a thing? So might you have to separate yourself from other people as well, like in an addiction or something? I mean, do you think that's a part of the process?
Yeah, when you
somebody's
Yeah,
moving on.
when you have broken attachment, you have really poor boundaries, and you have red flag behaviors in yourself that healthy people will detect that are a little unsettling to healthy people. So healthy people will select out of your life, but you also will be uncomfortable with them because you won't know the buttons to push to get their approval or to make them happy because they aren't easily pushable people. So you will get away from them, and they might seem boring, they might seem intimidating, they might just seem really bland. You don't know what's going on with them. And so people with broken attachment will select into groups of other people with broken attachment, and they cluster together, and then they push each other's buttons and they play the game. Especially anxious people will chase avoidant people to get approval without ever getting too close to be found out for who they are. And it's this ugly circle of, I believe this is real. I've never seen different. Healthy people avoid me. All my relationships have been bad. If there was better out there, I would have seen it by now. And it becomes this self-bias, self-selecting system that just reconfirms the faulty beliefs from your childhood. And meanwhile, healthy people are out there, connecting to healthy people. They live fairly quiet lives because they don't feel the need to crow about it. They're fulfilled in their relationships. So we don't hear a lot about those people who are living nice, quiet, comfortable, happy, secure lives. We just don't hear much about them. Meanwhile, in the news cycle is dominated by celebrities and people with broken attachment making really bad decisions in their lives based on these faulty assumptions and then the pain that it drives them into. And that reconfirms for us that attachment it's impossible. That's why people get stuck. And that's why people stay stuck in cycles where they don't connect to healthy people.
Yeah, it seems like you almost like it's like giving up a drug or something. Like I remember I interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke. I don't know if you know her. She's a dopamine specialist, and she talked about something with all addicts that she dealt with that was common to them was like they all wanted a super normal life. They weren't content with ordinary life. There was no, the boredom was, which is kind of inherent in a reasonably disciplined, organized life. That it was always trying to escape that. Is that something in a relationship, that it's not going to be the sparks and fireworks of the toxic love affair, I suppose? Do you think that's reasonable?
Well, when you think about it this way, we are meant to get a number of healthy brain chemicals with secure attachment. Number one is vasopressin, which comes from solving problems cooperatively with other people. If you don't believe you can work and cooperate with other people, all of your problems are solved by pushing buttons. So you don't get much vasopressin with other people because you can't even open up about what the problems are. If you don't have that, you also a lot of times don't have much oxytocin bonding. Oxytocin is warmth and care and nurturing, and it's meant to happen when we are in an absence of stress. So we are careful with each other, we are nurturing, we are warm, good physical contact, open conversation, and acceptance. If you didn't get much of that as a child, your brain shifts away from it and doesn't understand it, so it becomes fearful of oxytocin. If you don't have much oxytocin, you also won't get much GABA release in your brain. And GABA it's designed that when you have a stress event and cortisol floods your system, it suppresses the anxiety and depression symptoms you're going to feel and lessens that stress event on your system. So you're more resilient. And when you don't get all of these things and connect to other people, you don't get much serotonin in your system, which comes from a number of things, but also in your relationships, good conversation, openness, bonding, connectedness, physical contact, all those good pieces that we need. So when you are missing a huge portion of your brain chemistry like that, and you're deficient in a number of neurotransmitters and hormones, all you have left, for the most part, is dopamine. So you are binging dopamine to try to feel better all the time, and that's the whole of your life, which is why so many people with attachment issues fall into addiction, because they're pounding that button to just feel better, to manage their pain, to manage their fear, for escapism. That's the cycle of attachment to addiction. And when you fix your addiction, when you fix your attachment, it floods you with those good chemicals that you need, so then you can fight off addictions, you can fight off temptations, you can fight off relapses, because you don't need those things anymore. They're not fulfilling your endless dopamine craving and the need for a fun, exciting, extraordinary life, because regular life does fulfill you. Then you just do activities with the people you love and you get a flood of good brain chemicals, and it feels great. It feels like an extraordinary life lived with an ordinary manner. That's healthy attachment, and that's what we're all supposed to have.
That is so interesting, man. Dopamine is probably one of the topics I talk about most on this podcast, which everybody's pretty sick of listening to, because the research I'm doing on social media, obviously that type of technology acting on dopamine is pretty much the central mechanism of how it keeps people engaged. So it's interesting that it also has this relational kind of quality, but I guess it's all kind of goal-directed or pursuit activity. So I wonder, I mean, in a relationship, they say like that the first bit's kind of dopamine, and then you get over the initial kind of thrill of it, and then you have a proper relationship. I don't know if that's just a myth, but is it something that people get stuck on, this kind of the initial high, I suppose? Because I see a lot of people these days, and it's kind of like relationships are interchangeable. It's like once it gets boring, you just switch for another one. You're like, oh yeah, it's done. And I'll just get rid of it. And everybody's as good as everybody else, and it's all replaceable. Well, and you're kind of like,
when you never really attach to one person, then it's all just feelings. This is why cheating happens in relationships, because when you have broken attachment, everybody is just a person that you have to push their buttons so that they won't abandon you by doing nice things for approval, or so that they won't won't attack you or get too close or try to connect to you or do wrong things. The avoidance run away, and the anxious chase, but no one wants really to be caught or to catch. When you have that, your whole life is a system, like you said, with the love quote, your whole life is a system of, I'm the only person on earth that I can rely on, and I have to endlessly push buttons on other people and act upon them. So when you have that, all that relationships are is the feelings. It's not a deep, intimate connection with another human being. It's you connected to an object that makes you have feelings, or an object that scares you, so you have to make the object happy. That's what a relationship is. So yeah, you just swap one out for another, and what's the difference? It's just another person you got to push buttons on. That's what relationships are when you chase them that way. So yes, for the first 7 to 12 months, a lot of relationships are fake, because people don't want to talk about goals. They don't want to talk about principles. They don't want to talk about the things that are fundamental to them. They don't want to talk about the things they want to accomplish as a couple. They don't want to talk about those things because they think people will just run away and won't want anything to do with them. And they'll be exposed as a fraud, whatever it might be. So they binge them on dopamine. Avoidant people do something called love bombing, where they saturate you with dopamine and oxytocin in the beginning of the relationship, with care and nurturing and gifts and compliments and all kinds of things. You saturate the people at the beginning, and then the anxious person, who's got very little of that through their life, becomes chemically addicted to that one person and can't give them up, which then, when the avoidant person pulls back and withdraws, the anxious person will chase them and blame themselves for the mistakes, and will keep chasing and chasing and chasing. And that cycle is exactly what so many people see of these shallow, empty relationships that are all feelings, and they are all replaceable. And that's broken attachment. That's what that is.
Wow. It's a slightly terrifying story, isn't it? But I've done that. I've done that cycle in relationships. I have gone through that myself and seen that happen. And then in this relationship that I've been with my girlfriend now for nearly 3 years, and it was something that I set out from the start with the intention of saying that I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to say, you know, what I want and what I need, and I'm going to listen to what she wants and what she needs. And we actually did this book here. I don't know if you've heard of this. 8 Dates by John Gottman.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
John and Julie Gottman. Very interesting, because that kind of, it gives you 8 dates essentially, whereby it gives you a question for each date and a theme like trust or commitment or play. And it makes you have conversations. Conversations that I would have been scared to have before, but that you have to have, or else you don't get it. You don't have a relationship.
So much when people come into my coaching practice, that's what I do is I say, okay, here's how your first date should actually go. Here's how your second date should actually go. Here's how your third date should actually go. And they say, no, are you sure? Really? You should be talking about those things and asking those questions? Aren't people going to run away from me? And I say, well, yeah, the unhealthy people who are afraid of commitment, afraid of love, afraid of bonding, and they're just there to push your buttons and get feelings from you, yeah, they will run away. Guess what the healthy people will do? They will run towards you. They will commit to you. They will want this bonding to happen. So what trade do you want to make? People are like, well, okay, I'm going to try it. And they go have the best first date of their life and the best second date and the best third date. And they get into a deep, loving, committed relationship like you did, based on trust, based on honesty, based on cooperation. That's healthy attachment. You're doing great.
Yeah, man, and there's just a risk there, I suppose. That's kind of an interesting jumping off point. That's a kind of like a courage that it takes to even just to admit that certain things are true, or that you need certain things, that you want a certain kind of life, and to be honest with yourself to do it. It's really difficult, was what I learned. I always thought relationships were supposed to be kind of like a party or something. So it was a tough kind of learning experience to go, you know, there has to be work involved in this. You know, you have to put yourself in the, you know, put yourself on the line for the relationship. Is that something you see a lot with people?
When I work. Oh, absolutely. It's this should be feelings, and if it's not good feelings, then there's something wrong, and maybe we should just duck out of the relationship because we can't fix it. We can't collaborate. All I can do is push buttons. I can make the other person happy, or I can maybe punish them for doing their own thing, convince them it's their fault. We just need to push the other person's buttons enough to get to a better place in this relationship. And that's just not how that game goes. It's not what a relationship. That's not a relationship. That's you playing a video game. That's what that is.
Yeah.
So it is when I work with when I coach men or women on their first dates, and I say, go in and say, hey, you know what? Just so we're on the same page, you know, I am looking for a long-term committed relationship down the line. We don't have to get married today, but that is what I'm looking for down the line. So as we move forward, if that's your place and that's what you want to do, cool, let's do that. And let's talk about that with our head toward a committed relationship. If it's not, totally cool. Let's high five. Let's finish our dinner. We'll enjoy it. We'll go separate ways. No harm, no foul. And men and women both tell me, no, you know, men or women don't want that. They won't want me. They'll reject me. And I say, well, what would you like if someone came into the table and told you that? What would you say? Oh, I'd love that. Oh, well, give it a try. Just give it one try. And they do. And it's like, all right, Adam, that was the best date of my life. When you are open and honest about your goals with the other person, then you can move toward those goals as a team, and you don't have to be trying to push buttons endlessly on people. You just remind them, hey, you know what? This is our goal. And how do we both get to that goal together so that we can enjoy it?
Do you think you have to commit to a long-term relationship to have a healthy relationship? It was something I noticed was that if you don't talk about the future, if you don't have a future together, it's very hard to have a relationship now. There isn't, like, if you're just like, maybe we'll be together for a month, maybe a year, we'll see how it goes. Things get very complicated.
I don't think you have to get engaged on the first date and say, we are going to be together for 10 years at least. I don't think that. I do think that it needs to be matched. If both people are only looking for a short-term relationship, and they can both be open about that and say, yeah, you know, I'm looking for more of a shorter-term relationship and someone I can spend time with and this and this, but here's the end date for it for me. And the other person says, hey, I'm in the same boat. That's great. Then have that healthy conversation, have that goal together. Okay. But if one of you, at least one of you, is saying, no, I am looking for a committed relationship, and that's ultimately what I want, then you guys need to be on the same page. If one of you is like, let's try it for a month, it's not like, again, you don't have to get engaged right away, but say, this is what I want, then let's do our dating toward that, and let's see how we work, and let's do compatibility testing on various things over the next, 8, 10, 12 months, whatever it might be, a year, 2 years, test each other and see if we're truly compatible and how we work as a team. And then we'll know, but with an eye toward a commitment.
Yeah. And being in the same boat, I suppose, figuring that out pretty early. What do you think of this whole polyamory and everybody having, 10 girlfriends or whatever? Think it's functional? Yeah,
everyone asks me that. Everyone asks me that. And I say, as long as everybody is open and on the surface with exactly what they want and exactly what they need, so that nobody's needs are going unmet and nobody is just agreeing to things, hoping for approval, or just agreeing to it because they don't believe they can get better. If that's a legitimate arrangement between fully informed consenting adults, that's a whole different story than if people are in it trying to earn approval. They don't think they deserve better. They're in a committed relationship and their partner says, hey, you know what, I'm looking for more, and they're too afraid to say no. It really depends how everything is set up and what the adults in there are doing together.
Yeah, well, that sounds very mature and reasonable. I don't know if a lot of people do that when they go into it, but it sounds definitely if it'll work that way, I suppose. And what do you think of, I know you're big about marriage, and I feel like in our culture at the moment, there's obviously this fragmentation of traditional roles and traditional kind of archetypes, non-religious, secular society. Where does marriage fit in? How important do you think marriage is for healthy relationships?
I think marriage is crucial depending on what the goal of your relationship is. I tell people your relationship should have a purpose. If you're going to commit to a relationship, then that relationship should fulfill some deeper purpose for the two of you. Otherwise, you are just in this relationship so that both of you can try to feel good until one of you dies. And that is a recipe for divorce, and it's a recipe for one person losing, and it's a recipe for both of you being miserable. What is the purpose? And in the past history, the purpose of marriage was to raise children, and especially raise healthy children. And the research shows that if you have a child, the healthiest thing you can do for them is have a healthy marriage that the child is raised inside of. And attachment bears that out, and all the research bears that out. So if your purpose is to have a healthy marriage and healthy children and healthy grandchildren, healthy great-grandchildren, or if your purpose is to raise up a good company together or a nonprofit or to do, volunteering, deep volunteer service work for people, then your marriage should really augment that. If you are not aiming for something like that as a couple, then what are you really committing to? And why would you need a marriage at that point? That is my question. But everybody, I think, should be aiming towards some kind of legacy, which means you're going to find somebody else to share your life with who hopefully is looking to create that same legacy together. That's what marriage is really meant to be.
Yeah. And you mentioned divorce as well, which has obviously become a huge problem. I mean, my parents are divorced, and it definitely didn't do any good to me, to be honest. I don't think living in that kind of environment where there's just an endless kind of fight going on that just never gets resolved and never really seems to go anywhere. Which is quite, something I always said to myself that I didn't want to do, or didn't want to kind of have that type of relationship, Is divorce a big factor in attachment issues that you see? I guess, yeah, because of the family, but
it's a circle. It's a circle. So a parental divorce, usually parents who have attachment issues, they can't agree on things because they're not able to cooperate, and they don't understand what love is, and they fight over the attention. They fight over the affection. A lot of times moms and dads who both have attachment issues, moms change once they have the children and breastfeed the children. They get flooded with oxytocin for the first time in their life, and they become very protective of the children, want to take care of them, and then they see anxiety forming in the child as the child doesn't get good attachment because the parents aren't doing the right things to give them that attachment. But then she'll blame dad, and who has attachment issues, maybe avoidant, and dad becomes the enemy of the family, and they triangulate against him, and all kinds of things can happen, which then leads to a broken family system where the kids don't get healthy attachment, and then the divorce happens, and we get messages like, well, love just isn't enough, and caring about each other isn't enough. You just can't work. Sometimes love just doesn't work, and sometimes family just explodes and dies, and that's the messaging that the children get. So then they go out into the world, and they're like, I'm afraid of marriage. It's just going to die. It's just going to explode. It happened to me. I don't want it to happen. So then they're fearful of marriage. But what they're really fearful is building relationships with people who have broken attachment, who can't work together and cooperate. That's really the problem. It's not marriage that's the issue. It's non-cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, there's such an interest in that kind of this existential, almost like you're in a car that's going to just blow up at some point and you have no idea and you have no control over it. Or you're in a car that you can fix if it breaks down and keep it going. And you have the kind of what Gottman talks about is that like relationship disasters versus relationship masters, and that it's a skill. That really changed for me. I was like, wow, I never actually thought about it, that it was something you could practice, that you could work on it.
Yes.
And I'm sure lots of people feel that way.
Yes, that's exactly the game, is when you build these skills and practice them, it becomes more and more natural. It's not always so terrifying as it is the first time you try to be open and trusting people. It's a skill that you must practice and refine, but your brain rewards you tremendously for the experience, so it helps a lot.
Yeah, once it starts going the right way. And what, for somebody that's listening, I suppose, that's maybe this is ringing a few bells and they're going, oh God, this is, that's my story, or this is where I'm at. How would you encourage them to kind of start off? Like, where should they begin?
Oh, yeah. Well, step 0 is believing that you can even change your attachment. And I hopefully a few people in the audience are at least picking that up and thinking maybe it's possible. Step 1 then is learning to manage your fear enough that you can start having conversations with people and testing. And then you have to find people who are healthy enough, 2 or 3 people in your life, even just 2, that you can open up to, that you could trust enough to have that conversation with and say, you know what? here's me. I have these things called attachment issues, and I push people's buttons. I'm afraid I'm going to get abandoned. I have a hard time trusting people. I'm always afraid I'm going to get hurt, and I'm not sure what to do. How, I'm just starting out. But is this okay? And can you and I build an honest relationship where we actually cooperate to solve problems, and I can talk to you and be honest about how I feel, and you can be honest with me, and we'll help each other through life? Can we build that? And when you get that with 2 or 3 healthy people, your brain chemistry changes wildly to be able to open and connect with them. And I call that the I'm an anxious person speech. You have the I'm an anxious person speech, and then your brain will convince you that it was a fluke and it's not going to work. And then as you choose to cooperate in those relationships, the other person can call you out gently if you choose not to, and they'll say, hey, you're doing that thing you told me about. You go, oh, darn it. And then you have to do it. And as you overcome challenges with people, you start bonding to them and liking them. Vasopressin floods, oxytocin floods through you, serotonin, GABA all starts to flood, and then you're not chasing dopamine as much. And then you start leaning into it more. And the more that you do it, the more you want to do it. And it starts healing your whole process. And it's scary. It's terrifying. There's numerous steps. There's complicating factors. That's why I coach it. When you don't know what to do, you get a coach. But that is the process of learning to overcome that fear and experience it for yourself, and then trust it and lean into it. And the experience is what changes you.
That step 1 there, the fear, reminded me of something that John Gottman, I mean, you've definitely heard of his experiment where they wire people up in the fake B&B and they measure their arousal, and he could predict divorce to like 94% or something based just on their physiological response to each other, that they were giving each other this stress response, that they were perceiving each other as predators, basically. So their body was panicking. They were in a heightened state of arousal. How do you bring that state of arousal down? I mean, that's something I try to be aware of. I think of that state of arousal as almost like unsolved problems or something, or chaos, like you're responding to the uncertainty. And then you need to kind of have the conversations to map it out. Yeah, exactly. And how do you encourage people to deal with that, I suppose, at the outset?
So your physical body can overcome a lot of your emotional agitation. So I teach people some techniques to use their physical body to stress your body to an extent where your brain says, okay, something's going on with my body. I got to turn down my emotions to manage whatever is happening here. And it floods you with, lifting weights, for example, floods you with testosterone. It floods you with endorphins and all kinds of good brain chemicals, which then decreases the emotional agitation and makes you a little bit more resilient. And it makes you not as fearful that you're going to die. And it drains the emotional brain and restores logical functioning. And when this happens, you are able to lean into relationships and be a little more logical and overcome that existential dread of, if I tell this person how I feel, I am going to die. That's the fear that we're really dealing with. So when you use your physical body correctly, it builds that resilience and decreases your fear response tremendously.
That's awesome, man. I was thinking of something there, because something about this relationship was I'd quit drinking when I first got into this relationship for a long time, and drinking gives me anxiety. So drinking makes me uncomfortable. So it's very hard for me to have a normal relationship if I was drinking, because I'd be more anxious and hence less likely to kind of do anxiety provoking things. So that's like almost routine stuff, and practices like not exercising, eating bad food, drinking too much could have a detrimental effect on your attachment as well. I mean, it could be part of the issue.
Absolutely. Yes. When you're doing those things, you're messing up your brain chemistry, but you're also just spiking your anxiety. That's one big thing that I start teaching people is, if you are feeling anxiety in a relationship about something you need to say to the person, you probably need to say that thing to the person, because it's either going to wreck the relationship and then you'll be out of it and your anxiety goes down, or that's the bad outcome that almost never happens, or you're going to get reassurance from the other person of, hey, dude, it's not like that. I don't know where you're coming up with this thought, but it's actually like this. I tell people, go to your partner, and if you're afraid all the time that they're going to break up with you and that you're going to on a hair trigger and a landmine is going to be somewhere and you're not sure, go to them and say, hey, you know what? I'm afraid all the time that we're going to break up, that I'm going to lose you. And it makes me really nervous, and I'm just agitated all the time about losing you. And it's terrible. And I don't want to live like this anymore. So I'm breaking up with, no, not like, no, you go to them and say, okay,
is over.
This is what's happening. can we talk about what would actually break up our relationship? And I've done this with my friends. I grew up with anxious attachment myself. I grew up with attachment issues. I fixed them. And by fixing them, then I said, okay, I'm going to go study psychology and learn what I just did and maybe help other people do it. And I got my master's degree and then apprenticed as a psychotherapist and then worked as a psychotherapist for a while and then became an attachment specialist. And that's what I do now. But when you fix that, then you go to people like I did and like I still do. And I say, hey, you know what? Sometimes I worry a little bit about our relationship. I'm not sure where we're at. Can you tell me the things that would split us up so that we wouldn't be friends anymore? Can you tell me that? And let's talk about that so I don't have to worry about walking on eggshells. And hey, here's what would make me quit being your friend. And usually it's malicious behavior of you trying to viciously attack me or just endlessly lying to me in a way that hurts me. Like either one of those things, that's really it. And outside of that, that's whatever. If you make a mistake, let's talk about it. Let's fix it. And this lowers the threshold of terror for both sides because then you're not walking on eggshells. You don't have a gun to your head and that decreases that fear. So is that something you could do? You at home with your girlfriend there, man. Is that something you could do?
Yes. That I've actually done that exact. I think I might have heard it from you previously, to be honest. Setting the criteria of being like, look, if you do this and this, then that would end the relationship. Outside of that, it's cool. You can give out to me and do whatever and, make me go walking up mountains and stuff. I'll do it. It's fine. But
we'll talk about
setting that criteria.
Exactly.
I guess that's boundaries, I suppose. But there's something else that you're talking about there, which is not mind reading. That's something that I had a big problem with, which is thinking that I know what other people are thinking or what's going on with them or what the problem is without actually asking or saying, hey, what's up with this? I feel this way about it. Am I just being weird or is something going on? Just guessing all the time.
Mind reading in relationships is really trying to predict what an object is going to do if you hit a button. That's really what mind reading of other people is. You're not actually reading their mind. You are trying to predict what this object's going to do if you hit the wrong button. And is it going to jump sideways? Is it going to land on me? Is it going to crush me? Is it going to run away where I can't get to it anymore? What is this object going to do? That's mind reading. And that's why it sucks, because you're trying to predict what an object's going to do, but it's a human being. It's a human being with their own love and thoughts and feelings, and they will treat you differently because we don't really assume that objects are going to be morally and ethically good. We assume that objects are just going to attack us and hurt us and will simply be morally and ethically zero. So we assume automatically that everyone around us is a sociopath and is going to act like a sociopath toward us and hurt us without caring, either because we deserve it or because everyone's a sociopath. And when you open up to people, what you might be shocked to find is that most people are not sociopaths. Most people will say, well, I wouldn't treat you that way. Like, why would I hurt you that way? No, I would never do that to you. Here's the problem. If we did this would be an issue, but then I would yell at you and then we'd figure it out and then we'd solve it. And no, I would never just like you make one little mistake, you leave the milk out. So I pack up my clothes in a suitcase and leave while you're sleeping and never speak to you again. No, who would do that? But in our heads, we mind read to such an extent. And then we project sociopathic behaviors on the other people. And then no wonder it destroys our relationships.
It's incredible, man. And it's something that even outside of romantic relationships, it's almost a way of, I remember reading a quote and it was make them tell you no. So for any opportunity, like a job interview or, if you're, in my case, I'd be submitting things for writing and stuff like that, or like the scholarship that I got for college, like don't ever assume no before it happens. Don't try and think, oh, I know what's going to happen next, yada, yada. You're trying to read the future almost or something, and actually go and see what happens. Actually go the extra mile, even if, maybe it will be a no, but at least you went and saw it. I think that applies to relationships
so many
as
people.
well.
So many people sabotage their relationships in advance because they're anticipating such pain that will kill them. So then they start sabotaging their relationships from their side without ever talking to the other person about what's happening. And then the other person says, what is this person doing? They're destroying our relationship on purpose from their side. What is it? Are they malicious? Do they hate me? So then they start pulling away from you because they perceive you attacking them in some way, destroying the relationship. And they don't know what to say because now you're acting like an enemy. And the relationship got destroyed because you were so afraid of losing the other person that you sabotaged it without even talking to them. That is back to the mind reading, but yeah, that is so much what happens, and it's awful. Learning to have people say no is one of the best things you can do, because that was one thing I had to learn with my friends when I healed my anxious attachment was, I need to actually go to these people and say, hey, you know what? I feel like I'm screwing up so much in our relationship that you're pretty much done with me. Maybe I would be like, I can't imagine why you'd want to keep me around. Are we pretty much done? And are you getting frustrated with me? And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they'd go, what are you talking about? No, we're doing okay.
Fine.
Like, there's been a couple setbacks, but it's not your fault. I don't blame you. I'm fine. I didn't even think we had a problem. I'm like, oh. And if I had not stopped and said, make them say no, if I had not stopped and asked, maybe I would have broken the relationship myself. And that is what has given me so much passion to teach attachment, is the number of sabotaged, missed opportunities that people face in their life. It breaks my heart thinking about it and seeing people destroy their life when, frankly, they don't have to.
It's incredible. You could be in such a better situation if you just have that pause almost, just to be like, am I just guessing here? Do I actually know what it is? Like, do I need to just stop the noise in my head and actually be honest or tell the truth or, say no, put up a fight, bit of courage sometimes. What is it?
Say anything.
You touched on something there. Anything, like, just have the conversation, man. So that's what I love about these podcasts as well, is like you start in one place and you end in another, and there's always this kind of it's hard to put your finger on it, but it changes things in a way every time I have them. You're not the same person you are when you start and when you finish, even in a small way. And I think those type of conversations in your relationship or in your life are kind of regenerative, like they can fix things. And in a constructive growth kind of way. And what is it in your experience that destroys relationships? Because you said it there, like, what are the things that, you really can't do that if you're going to have a relationship? You can't go down that road.
Acting upon people destroys their trust in you because you do not cooperate with them. And nobody likes to be acted upon in that way. Because eventually the acting upon becomes hurtful. It becomes the stick instead of the carrot. It is not always loving and gentle acting upon. It must inevitably become angry, frustrated, driving, pushing, hurting, and nobody likes that. And nobody can trust somebody who does that, because you will never cooperate with them and they will never cooperate with you. And that destroys relationships over time. And the only thing that can fix that is learning to act together cooperatively, both sides, learning to cooperate together in good faith and trusting the other person to have good faith and work in good faith, and trusting yourself to be able to rise up and meet those requirements as well. That's the heart and soul of fixing your attachment right there, is learning to do that. And that's how you can take the thing that's going to destroy your relationship and learn to turn it around by doing the opposite of what you would usually do, which is open up and trust and give them a chance to say no, give them a chance to say ew, give them a chance to say, oh, I don't want that. Give them a chance to say, no, you're not for me. Give them a chance to say, no, you know what? You're right. We shouldn't be together. You're giving them a chance. And when you choose to give the other person a chance to act instead of to be acted upon, people love that. And people reward that, and people want to be around that. People value that. When you give people the space to act and trust them to act with good faith, that heals your relationships.
It's kind of like giving people their free will, or almost granting that they have, again, that Iris Murdoch quote that's like, that other people are real. Like, you're saying, you're a real person. I can say these things and whatever happens is going to happen because, that'll be your choice as a real person. Like, it's not this kind of, I can't control what's going to come next, like an object.
It's the respect for the dignity of a human being, instead of succumbing to your fear and robbing them of the dignity of a human being.
Wow. It's deep stuff, man. I wonder, did you feel that way about it when you first started teaching people? Because it touched you?
Overwhelming. When I learned about attachment and I started fixing my own attachment, it was like, what is this? I need to has somebody else figured this out? And then studying through psychology textbooks and going to grad school and getting my master's degree and then apprenticing. And when I first touched attachment the first few times, I was like, wait a minute, what is this? And then they would tell me, in grad school here in America, at least, they really focus on attachment is not important to understand because it's mostly just for little kids, because those are the only diagnoses that would deal with attachment. So don't worry about attachment if you're not working with little baby kids. And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess. And well, what else do we work on? So when I went back to it, I started looking at, well, you know, some of these diagnoses you can only diagnose as a little child, but some of these reactive attachment disorder and things like this kind of fits what this human being is doing. And they're like 30, 40. And I had a wonderful supervisor who at the time was telling me, like, well, you don't have to diagnose them with it, but maybe you should really think about that, where chase that feeling down. So I started learning about attachment and reading, you know, when you try to study attachment, it's, you know, 500-page textbooks with technical jargon, and it's these giant tomes that you have to study through, and then all these peer-reviewed journal articles that are, you know, kind of peripheral. And learning about attachment was tough, but it was like, it was like a training montage, you know, in a movie when they're like diving into text. And they're like, oh, I found it. And it is. That's what it was like. It was. That's what learning attachment was like. And then training people on it and seeing the light bulb goes on in their head when they hear about it and when they get it, and getting that feeling, like, that is amazing. And I love that. So yeah, it is like teaching people that you can break gravity. It is like the Matrix, teaching Neo that there is no spoon. And that's what, when I teach people attachment, it feels like there is no spoon, man. And they got to unlearn the spoon.
That's honestly, I mean, it makes so much sense in the context of what we just said, of seeing beyond the beliefs that you have is a pretty mystical process, man. It's not the most, almost like an initiation or something, but, I don't know. Maybe a bit beyond my pay grade at the moment, but thank you so much, Adam. This is, and I'll include obviously all the links and everything. Where's the best place for people to find you to get more of this wisdom and to, you know, sort themselves out?
Three places. If you like videos, short videos and information, check out my TikTok. It blew up in 8 weeks from 0 followers to 170,000. Now I'm up at almost 190,000. Like, we're just growing. So on TikTok, I'm at Attachment Bro. I'm also on Instagram at Attachment Adam. There's a lot more visuals and reading over there. So if you like those materials and you can share them more easily with people or save them and have them as your background, I'm over on Instagram at Attachment Adam. And number 3, my website, adamlanesmith.com. I've got my attachment bootcamp course over there. I've got my books available. I've got coaching, my Discord community, the attachment circle. I have everything available on my website. So those 3 places, I am all over the place. Find me. Let's talk.
Fantastic. It'll all be in the description as well. Thank you so much for your time, Adam, and for all your work. People really need it, so we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here.